1801. I have just returned from a visit to my landlord, the solitary neighbour that I shall be troubled with. "Mr. Heathcliff," I said. A nod was the answer. "Mr. Lockwood, your new tenant, sir. I do myself the honour of calling as soon as possible after my arrival to express the hope that I have not inconvenienced you by my perseverance in soliciting the occupation of Thrushcross Grange. I heard yesterday you had had some thoughts—"
"Thrushcross Grange is my own, sir," he interrupted, wincing. "I should not allow anyone to inconvenience me if I could hinder it. Walk in. Joseph, take Mr. Lockwood's horse and bring up some wine."
Joseph was an elderly, nay, an old man, very old, perhaps, though hale and sinewy. "The Lord help us," he soliloquized in an undertone of peevish displeasure while relieving me of my horse. Wuthering Heights is the name of Mr. Heathcliff's dwelling, Wuthering being a significant provincial adjective, descriptive of the atmospheric tumult to which its station is exposed in stormy weather. Before passing the threshold, I paused to admire a quantity of grotesque carving lavished over the front, and especially about the principal door, above which, among a wilderness of crumbling griffins and shameless little boys, I detected the date 1500, and the name Hareton Earnshaw. The floor was of smooth white stone, the chairs high-backed, primitive structures, painted green, one or two heavy black ones lurking in the shade. In an arch, under the dresser, reposed a huge liver-coloured bitch pointer, surrounded by a swarm of squealing puppies, and other dogs haunted other recesses. Mr. Heathcliff forms a singular contrast to his abode and style of living. He is a dark-skinned gipsy in aspect, in dress and manners, a gentleman. That is, as much a gentleman as many a country squire, rather slovenly, perhaps, yet not looking amiss with his negligence, because he has an erect and handsome figure, and rather morose. Possibly some people might suspect him of a degree of underbred pride. I have a sympathetic chord within that tells me it is nothing of the sort. I know by instinct his reserve springs from an aversion to showy displays of feeling, to manifestations of mutual kindness. He'll love and hate equally under cover, and esteem it a species of impertinence to be loved or hated again. No, I'm running on too fast. I bestow my own attributes over-liberally on him. I took a seat at the end of the hearthstone opposite that towards which my landlord advanced, and filled up an interval of silence by attempting to caress the canine mother who had left her nursery and was sneaking wolfishly to the back of my leg, her lip curled up and her white teeth watering for a snatch. My caress provoked a long, guttural snarl. Heathcliff's countenance relaxed into a grin.
"Come, come, Mr. Lockwood," he said. "You are flurried. Here, take a little wine. Guests are so exceedingly rare in this house that I and my dogs, I am willing to own, hardly know how to receive them. Your health, sir."
He, probably swayed by prudential considerations of the folly of offending a good tenant, relaxed a little, and introduced what he supposed would be a subject of interest to me, a discourse on the advantages and disadvantages of my present place of retirement. I found him very intelligent on the topics we touched, and before I went home I was encouraged so far as to volunteer another visit tomorrow. He evidently wished no repetition of my intrusion. I shall go, notwithstanding. It is astonishing how sociable I feel myself compared with him. Yesterday afternoon set in misty and cold. I had half a mind to spend it by my study fire, instead of wading through heath and mud to Wuthering Heights. On coming up from dinner, however, I took my hat, and after a 4 miles walk, arrived at Heathcliff's garden just in time to escape the first feathery flakes of a snow shower. A young man, without a coat and shouldering a pitchfork, appeared in the yard behind. He hailed me to follow him, and after marching through a wash-house and a paved area containing a coal-shed, pump and pigeon-cote, we at length arrived at the huge, warm, cheerful apartment where I was formerly received. It glowed delightfully in the radiance of an immense fire, compounded of coal, peat, and wood, and near the table, laid for a plentiful evening meal, I was pleased to observe the Mrs., an individual whose existence I had never previously suspected. I bowed and waited, thinking she would bid me take a seat. She looked at me, leaning back in her chair, and remained motionless and mute. "Rough weather," I remarked. "I'm afraid, Mrs. Heathcliff, the door must bear the consequence of your servant's leisure attendance. I had hard work to make them hear me." "You should not have come out," she said. Her position before was sheltered from the light. Now I had a distinct view of her whole figure and countenance. She was slender, and apparently scarcely past girlhood. An admirable form, and the most exquisite little face that I have ever had the pleasure of beholding. Meanwhile, the young man had slung onto his person a decidedly shabby upper garment, and, erecting himself before the blaze, looked down on me from the corner of his eyes for all the world as if there were some mortal feud, unavenged, between us. I began to doubt whether he were a servant or not. His dress and speech were both rude, entirely devoid of the superiority observable in Mr. and Mrs. Heathcliff. His thick brown curls were rough and uncultivated, his whiskers encroached bearishly over his cheeks, and his hands were embrowned like those of the common labourer. Still, his bearing was free, almost haughty, and he showed none of a domestic's assiduity in attending on the lady of the house. In the absence of clear proofs of his condition, I deemed it best to abstain from noticing his curious conduct, and 5 minutes afterwards the entrance of Heathcliff relieved me in some measure from my uncomfortable state. "You see, sir, I am come according to promise," I exclaimed, assuming the cheerful, "and I fear I shall be weather-bound for half an hour, if you can afford me shelter during that space."
"Half an hour,"
he said, shaking the white flakes from his clothes.
"I wonder you should select the thick of a snowstorm to ramble about in. Do you know that you run a risk of being lost in the marshes? People familiar with these moors often miss their road on such evenings, and I can tell you there is no chance of a change at present."
"Perhaps I can get a guide among your lads, and he might stay at the Grange till morning. Could you spare me one?"
"No, I could not."
"Oh, indeed. Well, then I must trust to my own sagacity."
Are you going to make the tea?"
demanded he of the shabby coat, shifting his ferocious gaze from me to the young lady. "It is strange," I began, in the interval of swallowing one cup of tea and receiving another, "it is strange how custom can mould our tastes and ideas. Many could not imagine the existence of happiness in a life of such complete exile from the world as you spend, Mr. Heathcliff. Yet I'll venture to say that, surrounded by your family and with your amiable lady as the presiding genius over your home and heart—"
"My amiable lady?"
he interrupted with an almost diabolical sneer on his face.
"Where is she, my amiable lady?"
"Mrs. Heathcliff, your wife, I mean." Then it flashed on me. The clown at my elbow, who is drinking his tea out of a basin and eating his bread with unwashed hands, may be her husband, Heathcliff Junior, of course.
"Mrs. Heathcliff is my daughter-in-law,"
said Heathcliff, corroborating my surmise. "Ah, certainly, I see now. You are the favoured possessor of the beneficent fairy," I remarked, turning to my neighbour. This was worse than before. The youth grew crimson and clenched his fist with every appearance of a meditated assault. But he seemed to recollect himself presently, and smothered the storm in a brutal curse, muttered on my behalf, which, however, I took care not to notice.
"Unhappy in your conjectures, sir,"
observed my host.
"We neither of us have the privilege of owning your good fairy. Her mate is dead. I said she was my daughter-in-law, therefore she must have married my son.
And this young man is—"
"Not my son, assuredly."
Heathcliff smiled again, as if it were rather too bold a jest to attribute the paternity of that bear to him.
"My name is Hareton Earnshaw," growled the other, "and I'd counsel you to respect it."
The business of eating being concluded, and no one uttering a word of sociable conversation, I approached a window to examine the weather. A sorrowful sight I saw. Dark night coming down prematurely, and sky and hills mingled in one bitter whirl of wind and suffocating snow. "I don't think it possible for me to get home now without a guide," I could not help exclaiming. "The roads will be buried already, and if they were bare, I could scarcely distinguish a foot in advance."
"Hareton, drive those dozen sheep into the barn porch. They'll be covered if left in the fold all night, and put a plank before them," said Heathcliff.
"How must I do?" I continued with rising irritation. There was no reply to my question, and on looking round I saw only Joseph bringing in a pail of porridge for the dogs, and Mrs. Heathcliff leaning over the fire, diverting herself with burning a bundle of matches which had fallen from the chimney-piece as she restored the tea canister to its place. "Mrs. Heathcliff," I said earnestly, "you must excuse me for troubling you, I presume, because with that face I'm sure you cannot help being good-hearted. Do point out some landmarks by which I may know my way home. I have no more idea how to get there than you would have how to get to London." "Take the road you came," she answered, ensconcing herself in a chair, with a candle and the long book open before her. "It is brief advice, but as sound as I can give." "Then it follows that I am compelled to stay." While leading the way upstairs, Zillah, the housewife, recommended that I should hide the candle and not make a noise, for Heathcliff had an odd notion about the chamber she would put me in, and never let anybody lodge there willingly. Too stupefied to be curious myself, I fastened my door and glanced round for the bed. The whole furniture consisted of a chair, a clothes-press, and a large oak case, with squares cut out near the top, resembling coach windows. Having approached this structure, I looked inside, and perceived it to be a singular sort of old-fashioned couch, very conveniently designed to obviate the necessity for every member of the family having a room to himself. In fact, it formed a little closet, and the ledge of a window which it enclosed served as a table. I slid back the panelled sides, got in with my light, pulled them together again, and felt secure against the vigilance of Heathcliff and everyone else. The ledge where I placed my candle had a few mildewed books piled up in one corner, and it was covered with writing scratched on the paint. This writing, however, was nothing but a name repeated in all kinds of characters, large and small. Catherine Earnshaw. Here and there varied to Catherine Heathcliff, and then again to Catherine Linton. In vapid listlessness I leant my head against the window and continued spelling over Catherine Earnshaw, Heathcliff, Linton, till my eyes closed. But they had not rested 5 minutes when a glare of white letters started from the dark, as vivid as spectres. The air swarmed with Catherines, and rousing myself to dispel the obtrusive name, I discovered my candle-wick reclined on one of the antique volumes, and perfuming the place with an odour of roasted calf-skin. I snuffed it off, and, very ill at ease under the influence of cold and lingering nausea, sat up, and spread open the injured tome on my knee. It was a testament, in lean type and smelling dreadfully musty. A flyleaf bore the inscription, "Catherine Earnshaw, her book," and a date some quarter of a century back. I shut and took up another, and another, till I had examined all. Catherine's library was select, and its state of dilapidation proved it to have been well used, though not altogether for a legitimate purpose. Scarcely one chapter had escaped a pen-and-ink commentary, at least the appearance of one, covering every morsel of blank that the printer had left. An immediate interest kindled within me for the unknown Catherine, and I began forthwith to decipher her faded hieroglyphics. "An awful Sunday," commenced the paragraph beneath. "I wish my father were back again. Hindley is a detestable substitute. His conduct to Heathcliff is atrocious. H. and I are going to rebel. We took our initiatory step this evening. All day had been flooding with rain. We could not go to church, so Joseph must needs get up a congregation in the garret. And while Hindley and his wife basked downstairs before a comfortable fire, doing anything but reading their Bibles, I'll answer for it, Heathcliff, myself, and the unhappy ploughboy were commanded to take our prayer books and mount the stairs. We were ranged in a row on a sack of corn, groaning and shivering and hoping that Joseph would shiver too, so that he might give us a short homily for his own sake. A vain idea. The service lasted precisely 3 hours. And yet my brother had the face to exclaim when he saw us descending, "What, done already?" On Sunday evening we used to be permitted to play, if we did not make much noise. Now a mere titter is sufficient to send us into corners. "You forget you have a master here," says the tyrant. "I'll demolish the first who puts me out of temper. I insist on perfect sobriety and silence." "Oh, boy, was that you?" "Francis, darling, pull his hair as you go by. I heard him snap his fingers." Francis pulled his hair heartily, and then went and seated herself on her husband's knee, and there they were like 2 babies, kissing and talking nonsense by the hour, foolish palaver that we should be ashamed of. We made ourselves as snug as our means allowed in the arch of the dresser. I had just fastened our pinafores together and hung them up for a curtain, when in comes Joseph on an errand from the stables. He tears down my handiwork, boxes my ears, and croaks,
"Maester no but just buried, and Sabbath not heard, and sounded gospel still in your lugs, and your dear be laking. Shame on ye! Sit ye down, ill childer. There's good books enough if you'll read 'em. Sit ye down and think of your souls."
Saying this, he compelled us to square our positions that we might receive from the fire far off a dull ray to show us the text of the lumber he thrust upon us. I could not bear the employment. I took my dingy volume by the scroop and hurled it into the dog-kennel, vowing I hated a good book. Heathcliff kicked his to the same place. Then there was a hubbub.
"Master Hindley," shouted our chaplain, "Master, come hither. Miss Cathy's riven the back off the helmet to salvation, and Heathcliff's paused his fit into the first part at Broadway to destruction. It's fair flesh, but ye let him go at this gate. The old man had laced him properly, but he's gone."
Hindley hurried up from his paradise on the hearth, and seizing one of us by the collar and the other by the arm, hurled both into the back kitchen, where, Joseph asseverated, "Old Nick would fetch us as sure as we were living." And so, comforted, we each sought a separate nook to await his advent. I reached this book, and a pot of ink from the shelf, and pushed the house door ajar to give me light. And I've got the time on with writing for 20 minutes. But my companion is impatient, and proposes that we should appropriate the dairywoman's cloak and have a scamper on the moors, under its shelter. A pleasant suggestion. Then, if the surly old man come in, he may believe his prophecy verified. We cannot be damper or colder in the rain than we are here. I suppose Catherine fulfilled her project, for the next sentence took up another subject. She waxed lachrymose. "How little did I dream that Hindley would ever make me cry so," she wrote. "My head aches till I cannot keep it on the pillow, and still I can't give over. Poor Heathcliff! Hindley calls him a vagabond and won't let him sit with us, nor eat with us any more, and, he says, he and I must not play together, and threatens to turn him out of the house if we break his orders. He has been blaming our father. How dared he, for treating H too liberally, and swears he will reduce him to his right place." I began to nod drowsily over the dim page. My eye wandered from manuscript to print. I saw a red ornamented title, 70 times 7 and the 1st of the 71st, a pious discourse delivered by the Reverend Jabez Branderham in the chapel of Gimmerden Sow. And while I was half-consciously worrying my brain to guess what Jabez Branderham would make of his subject, I sank back in bed and fell asleep. Alas for the effects of bad tea and bad temper! What else could it be that made me pass such a terrible night? I don't remember another that I can at all compare with it since I was capable of suffering. I began to dream almost before I ceased to be sensible of my locality. I remembered I was lying in the oak closet, and I heard distinctly the gusty wind and the driving of the snow. I heard also a fir bough repeat its teasing sound against the window, and ascribed it to the right cause. But it annoyed me so much that I resolved to silence it if possible, and I thought I rose and endeavoured to unhasp the casement. The hook was soldered into the staple, a circumstance observed by me when awake, but forgotten. I must stop it nevertheless, I muttered, knocking my knuckles through the branch, instead of which my fingers closed on the fingers of a little ice-cold hand. The intense horror of nightmare came over me. I tried to draw back my arm, but the hand clung to it, and a most melancholy voice sobbed, "Let me in, let me in." "Who are you?" I asked, struggling meanwhile to disengage myself. "Catherine Linton," it replied shiveringly. Why did I think of Linton? I had read Earnshaw 20 times for Linton. "I'm come home. I'd lost my way on the moor." As it spoke, I discerned obscurely a child's face looking through the window. Terror made me cruel, and finding it useless to attempt shaking the creature off, I pulled its wrist onto the broken pane and rubbed it to and fro till the blood ran down and soaked the bedclothes. Still it wailed, "Let me in," and maintained its tenacious grip, almost maddening me with fear. "How can I said at length. "Let me go, if you want me to let you in." The fingers relaxed. I snatched mine through the hole, hurriedly piled the books up in a pyramid against it, and stopped my ears to exclude the lamentable prayer. I seemed to keep them closed above a quarter of an hour. Yet the instant I listened again, there was the doleful cry moaning on. "Begone!" I shouted. "I'll never let you in, not if you beg for 20 years. "It's 20 years, mourned the voice. 20 years. I've been a waif for 20 years. Thereat began a feeble scratching outside, and the pile of books moved as if thrust forward. I tried to jump up, but could not stir a limb, and so yelled aloud in a frenzy of fright. To my confusion, I discovered the yell was not ideal. Hasty footsteps approached my chamber door. Somebody pushed it open with a vigorous hand, and a light glimmered through the squares at the top of the bed. I sat, shuddering yet, and wiping the perspiration from my forehead. The intruder appeared to hesitate, and muttered to himself. At last he said, in a half-whisper, plainly not expecting an answer, "Is anyone here?" I considered it best to confess my presence, for I knew Heathcliff's accents, and feared he might search further if I kept quiet. With this intention, I turned and opened the panels. I shall not soon forget the effect my action produced. Heathcliff stood near the entrance in his shirt and trousers, with a candle dripping over his fingers, and his face as white as the wall behind him. The first creak of the oak startled him like an electric shock. The light leaped from his hold to a distance of some feet, and his agitation was so extreme that he could hardly pick it up. "It is only your guest, sir," I called out, desirous to spare him the humiliation of exposing his cowardice further. "I had the misfortune to scream in my sleep, owing to a frightful nightmare. I'm sorry I disturbed you."
"What do you mean?" asked Heathcliff. "And what are you doing? Lie down and finish out the night, since you are here. But for heaven's sake, don't repeat that horrid noise. Nothing could excuse it, unless you were having your throat cut."
"If the little fiend had got in at the window, she probably would have strangled me," I returned. "I'm not going to endure the persecutions of your hospitable ancestors again. That minx, Catherine Linton, or Earnshaw, or however she was called, she must have been a changeling, wicked little soul. She told me she had been walking the earth these 20 years. A just punishment for her mortal transgressions, I've no doubt." Scarcely were these words uttered when I recollected the association of Heathcliff's with Catherine's name in the book, which had completely slipped from my memory till thus awakened.
"What can you mean by talking in this way to me?" thundered Heathcliff with savage vehemence. How dare you under my roof? God, he's mad to speak so!"
And he struck his forehead with rage. He gradually fell back into the shelter of the bed, finally sitting down almost concealed by it. I guessed, however, by his irregular and intercepted breathing that he struggled to vanquish an access of violent emotion.
"Mr. Lockwood," he said, "you may go into my room. You'll only be in the way coming downstairs so early. and your childish outcry has sent sleep to the devil for me."
I obeyed so far as to quit the chamber, when, ignorant where the narrow lobbies led, I stood still, and was witness, involuntarily, to a piece of superstition on the part of my landlord which belied oddly his apparent sense. He got onto the bed and wrenched open the lattice, bursting, as he pulled at it, into an uncontrollable passion of tears.
"Come in,
he sobbed.
Cathy! Do come, oh, do, once more. Oh, my heart's darling, hear me this time. Catherine, at last."
There was such anguish in the gush of grief that accompanied this raving that my compassion made me overlook its folly, and I drew off, half angry to have listened at all, and vexed at having related my ridiculous nightmare since it produced that agony. The why was beyond my comprehension. Next morning I declined joining their breakfast, and at the first gleam of dawn took an opportunity of escaping into the free air, now clear and still, and cold as impalpable ice. My landlord hallooed for me to stop ere I reached the bottom of the garden, and offered to accompany me across the moors. We exchanged little conversation, and he halted at the entrance of Thrushcross Park, saying I could make no error there. The distance from the gate to the Grange is 2 miles. I believe I managed to make it 4, what with losing myself among the trees and sinking up to the neck in snow. I dragged upstairs, whence, after putting on dry clothes and pacing to and fro 30 or 40 minutes to restore the animal heat, I am adjourned to my study, feeble as a kitten, almost too much so to enjoy the cheerful fire and smoking coffee which the servant has prepared for my refreshment. What vain weathercocks we are! I, who had determined to hold myself independent of all social intercourse, and thanked my stars that at length I had lighted on a spot where it was next to impracticable, I, weak wretch, after maintaining till dusk a struggle with low spirits and solitude, was finally compelled to strike my colours, and, under pretence of gaining information concerning the necessities of my establishment, I desired my housekeeper, Mrs. Dean, when she brought in supper, to sit down while I ate it, hoping sincerely she would prove a regular gossip, and either rouse me to animation or lull me to sleep by her talk. "You have lived here a considerable time," I commenced. "Did you not say 16 years?" 18, sir. I came when the mistress was married to wait on her. After she died, the master retained me for his housekeeper. Our times are greatly changed since then." "Yes," I remarked. "You've seen a good many alterations, I suppose?" "Oh, I have. And troubles, too," she said. "Oh, I'll turn the talk on my landlord's family," I thought to myself. "A good subject to start. And that pretty girl widow, I should like to know her history. Whether she be a native of the country, or, as is more probable, an exotic that the surly indigene will not recognise for kin." With this intention, I asked Mrs. Dean why Heathcliff let Thrushcross Grange and preferred living in a situation and residence so much inferior. "Is he not rich enough to keep the estate in good order?" I inquired. "Rich, sir," she returned. "He has nobody knows what money, and every year it increases. Yes, he's rich enough to live in a finer house than this, but he's very near, close-handed, and if he had meant to flit to Thrushcross Grange as soon as he heard of a good tenant, he could not have borne to miss the chance of getting a few hundreds more. It is strange people should be so greedy when they are alone in the world. He had a son, it seems." "Yes, he had one. He is dead." "And that young lady, Mrs. Heathcliff, is his widow?" "Yes." "Where did she come from originally?" "Why, sir, she is my late master's daughter. Catherine Linton was her maiden name. I nursed her, poor thing. I did wish Mr. Heathcliff would remove here, and then we might have been together again." "What, Catherine Linton?" I exclaimed, astonished. but a minute's reflection convinced me it was not my ghostly Catherine. Then, I continued, my predecessor's name was Linton. It was. And who is that Earnshaw, Hareton Earnshaw, who lives with Mr. Heathcliff? Are they relations? No. He is the late Mrs. Linton's nephew. Oh, the young lady's cousin, then? Yes, and her husband was her cousin also, one on the mother's, the other on the father's side. Heathcliff married Mr. Linton's sister. I see the house at Wuthering Heights has Earnshaw carved over the front door. Are they an old family? Very old, sir. And Hareton is the last of them, as our Miss Cathy is of us. I mean, of the Lintons. Have you been to Wuthering Heights? I beg pardon for asking, but I should like to hear how she is. Mrs. Heathcliff? She looked very well, and very handsome, yet I think not very happy. Oh dear, I don't wonder. And how did you like the master? A rough fellow, rather, Mrs. Dean. Is not that his character? Rough as a saw edge and hard as a whinstone. The less you meddle with him, the better. He must have had some ups and downs in life to make him such a churl. Do you know anything of his history? It's a cuckoo's, sir. I know all about it, except where he was born and who were his parents. Well, Mrs. Dean, it will be a charitable deed to tell me something of my neighbours. I feel I shall not rest if I go to bed, so be good enough to sit and chat an hour. Well, before I came to live here, she commenced, waiting no further invitation to her story, I was almost always at Wuthering Heights, because my mother had nursed Mr. Hindley Earnshaw, that was Hareton's father, and I got used to playing with the children. I ran errands, too, and helped to make hay, and hung about the farm, ready for anything that anybody would set me to do. One fine summer morning, it was the beginning of harvest, I remember, Mr. Earnshaw, the old master, came downstairs dressed for a journey. And after he had told Joseph what was to be done during the day, he turned to Hindley and Cathy, and me, for I sat eating my porridge with them, and he said, speaking to his son, "Now, my bonny man, I'm going to Liverpool today. What shall I bring you? You may choose what you like, only let it be little, for I shall walk there and back, 60 miles each way, and that is a long spell." Hindley named a fiddle, and then he asked Miss Cathy. She was hardly 6 years old, but she could ride any horse in the stable, and she chose a whip. He did not forget me, for he had a kind heart, though he was rather severe sometimes. He promised to bring me a pocketful of apples and pears. And then he kissed his children good-bye and set off. It seemed a long while to us all, the 3 days of his absence, and often did little Cathy ask when he would be home. Mrs. Earnshaw expected him by supper-time on the 3rd evening, and she put off the meal hour after hour. There were no signs of his coming, however, and at last the children got tired of running down to the gate to look. Then it grew dark. She would have had them to bed, but they begged sadly to be allowed to stay up, and just about 11 o'clock the door-latch was raised quietly, and in stepped the master. He threw himself into a chair, laughing and groaning, and bid them all stand off, for he was nearly killed. He would not have another such a walk for the 3 kingdoms. And at the end of it to be flighted to death, he said, opening his great coat, which he held bundled up in his arms. "See here, wife, I was never so beaten with anything in my life, but you must e'en take it as a gift of God, though it's as dark almost as if it came from the devil." We crowded round, and over Miss Cathy's head I had a peep at a dirty, ragged, black-haired child, big enough both to walk and talk. Indeed, its face looked older than Catherine's. Yet, when it was set on its feet, it only stared round and repeated over and over again some gibberish that nobody could understand. I was frightened, and Mrs. Earnshaw was ready to fling it out of doors. She did fly up, asking how he could fashion to bring that gipsy brat into the house, when they had their own bairns to feed and fend for, what he meant to do with it, and whether he were mad. The master tried to explain the matter, but he was really half dead with fatigue, and all that I could make out amongst her scolding was a tale of his seeing it starving and houseless and as good as dumb in the streets of Liverpool, where he picked it up and inquired for its owner. Not a soul knew to whom it belonged, he said, and his money and time being both limited, he thought it better to take it home with him at once, than run into vain expenses there, because he was determined he would not leave it as he found it. This was Heathcliff's first introduction to the family. They christened him Heathcliff. It was the name of a son who died in childhood, and it has served him ever since, both for Christian and surname. Miss Cathy and he became very thick, but Hindley hated him, and to say the truth, I did the same. He seemed a sullen, patient child, hardened perhaps to ill treatment. He would stand Hindley's blows without winking or shedding a tear, and my pinches moved him only to draw in a breath and open his eyes as if he had hurt himself by accident, and nobody was to blame. This endurance made old Earnshaw furious when he discovered his son persecuting the poor fatherless child, as he called him. He took to Heathcliff strangely, believing all he said. For that matter, he said precious little, and generally the truth, and petting him far above Cathy, who was, in any event, too mischievous and wayward for a favourite. So, from the very beginning, he bred bad feeling in the house, and at Mrs. Earnshaw's death, which happened in less than 2 years after, the young master had learnt to regard his father as an oppressor rather than a friend, and Heathcliff as a usurper of his parents' affections and his privileges, and he grew bitter with brooding over these injuries. I sympathised a while, but when the children fell ill of the measles, and I had to tend them and take on me the cares of a woman, at once I changed my ideas. Heathcliff was dangerously sick, and I will say this, he was the quietest child that ever nurse watched over. The difference between him and the others forced me to be less partial. Cathy and her brother harassed me terribly. He was as uncomplaining as a lamb, though hardness, not gentleness, made him give little trouble. He got through, and the doctor affirmed it was in a great measure owing to me, and praised me for my care. I was vain of his commendations, and softened towards the being by whose means I earned them. Still, I couldn't dote on Heathcliff, and I wondered often what my master saw to admire so much in the sullen boy, who never, to my recollection, repaid his indulgence by any sign of gratitude. In the course of time, Mr. Earnshaw began to fail. He died quietly in his chair one October evening, seated by the fireside. A high wind blustered round the house and roared in the chimney. It sounded wild and stormy, yet it was not cold, and we were all together. I, a little removed from the hearth, busy at my knitting, and Joseph reading his Bible near the table, for the servants generally sat in the house then, after their work was done. Miss Cathy had been sick, and that made her still. She leant against her father's knee, and Heathcliff was lying on the floor with his head in her lap. Joseph, having finished his chapter, got up and said that he must rouse the master for prayers in bed. He stepped forward and called him by name, and touched his shoulder, but he would not move. So he took the candle and looked at him. I thought there was something wrong as he set down the light, and seizing the children each by an arm, whispered them to frame upstairs and make little din. They might pray alone that evening. He had somewhat to do. "I shall bid father good night first," said Catherine, putting her arms round his neck before we could hinder her. The poor thing discovered her loss directly. She screamed out, "Oh, he's dead! Heathcliff! He's dead!" And they both set up a heart-breaking cry. I joined my wail to theirs, loud and bitter. But Joseph asked what we could be thinking of to roar in that way over a saint in heaven. He told me to put on my cloak and run to Gimmerton for the doctor and the parson. I could not guess the use that either would be of then. However, I went through wind and rain and brought one, the doctor, back with me. The other said he would come in the morning. Leaving Joseph to explain matters, I ran to the children's room. Their door was ajar. I saw they had never laid down, though it was past midnight. But they were calmer, and did not need me to console them. The little souls were comforting each other with better thoughts than I could have hit on. No parson in the world ever pictured heaven so beautifully as they did, in their innocent talk. And while I sobbed and listened, I could not help wishing we were all there, safe together. Mr. Hindley, who had been sent away to college, came home to the funeral, and, a thing that amazed us and set the neighbours gossiping right and left, he brought a wife with him. He was altered considerably in the 3 years of his absence. He had grown sparer, and lost his colour, and spoke and dressed quite differently. And on the very day of his return he told Joseph and me we must thenceforth quarter ourselves in the back kitchen, and leave the house for him. Indeed, he would have carpeted and papered a small spare room for a parlour. But his wife expressed such pleasure at the white floor and huge glowing fireplace, at the pewter dishes and elf case and dog kennel, and the wide space there was to move about in where they usually sat, that he thought it unnecessary to her comfort, and so dropped the intention. She expressed pleasure, too, at finding a sister among her new acquaintance, and she prattled to Catherine, and kissed her, and ran about with her, and gave her quantities of presents at the beginning. Her affection tired very soon, however, and when she grew peevish, Hindley became tyrannical. He drove Heathcliff from their company to the servants, deprived him of the instructions of the curate, and insisted that he should labour out of doors instead, compelling him to do so as hard as any other lad on the farm. Heathcliff bore his degradation pretty well at first, because Cathy taught him what she learnt, and worked or played with him in the fields. But it was one of their chief amusements to run away to the moors in the morning and remain there all day, and the after-punishment grew a mere thing to laugh at. The curate might set as many chapters as he pleased for Catherine to get by heart, and Joseph might thrash Heathcliff till his arm ached. They forgot everything the minute they were together again. At least the minute they had contrived some naughty plan of revenge, and many a time I've cried to myself to watch them growing more reckless daily, and I not daring to speak a syllable for fear of losing the small power I still retained over the unfriended creatures. One Sunday evening it chanced that they were banished from the sitting-room for making a noise, or slight offence of the kind, and when I went to call them to supper, I could discover them nowhere. We searched the house above and below, and the yard and stables. They were invisible. And at last Hindley, in a passion, told us to bolt the doors, and swore nobody should let them in that night. The household went to bed, and I, too anxious to lie down, opened my lattice and put my head out to hearken, though it rained, determined to admit them in spite of the prohibition should they return. In a while I distinguished steps coming up the road, and the light of a lantern glimmering through the gate. I threw a shawl over my head and ran to prevent them from waking Mr. Earnshaw by knocking. There was Heathcliff, by himself. It gave me a start to see him alone. "Where is Miss Catherine?" I cried hurriedly. "No accident, I hope?" "At Thrushcross Grange," he answered, "and I would have been there too, but they're not the manners to ask me to stay." "Well, you will catch it," I said. "You'll never be content till you're sent about your business. What in the world led you wandering to Thrushcross Grange?" "Let me get my wet clothes off, and I'll tell you all about it, Nelly," he replied. I bid him beware of rousing the master, and while he undressed, and I waited to put out the candle, he continued. "Cathy and I escaped from the wash-house to have a ramble at liberty, and getting a glimpse of the Grange lights, we thought we would just go and see how the Lintons passed their Sunday evenings. We ran from the top of the heights to the park without stopping, crept through a broken hedge, groped our way up the path, and planted ourselves on a flower pot under the drawing-room window. Both of us were able to look in by standing on the basement and clinging to the ledge, and we saw old Mr. and Mrs. Linton were not there. Edgar and his sister had it entirely to themselves, and now guess what your good children were doing. Isabella, I believe she's 11, a year younger than Cathy, lay screaming at the farther end of the room, shrieking as if witches were running red-hot needles into her. Edgar stood on the hearth, weeping silently, and in the middle of the table sat a little dog, shaking its paw and yelping, which from their mutual accusations we understood they had nearly pulled in two between them. The idiots! That was their pleasure, to quarrel who should hold a heap of warm air, and each begin to cry because both, after struggling to get it, refused to take it. We laughed outright at the petted things. We did despise them. I had not exchanged for 1,000 lives my condition here for Edgar Linton's at Thrushcross Grange, not if I might have the privilege of flinging Joseph off the highest gable and painting the house front with Hindley's blood. I interrupted. "Still, you've not told me, Heathcliff, how Catherine is left behind." "I told you. We laughed. he answered. The Lintons heard this, and with one accord they shot like arrows to the door. There was silence, and then a cry, "Oh, mamma, mamma, oh, papa, oh, mamma, come here, oh, papa, oh." They really did howl out something in that way. We made frightful noises to terrify them still more, and then we dropped off the ledge because somebody was drawing the bars, and we felt we'd better flee. I had Cathy by the hand and was urging her on, when, all at once, she fell down.